wanted to welcome everyone to John L. Scott Facebook Fridays. This is James Colburn, and we are so excited to introduce you to our guest of the day, Joel Singer. But first, I just want to tell everyone about John L. Scott. We're in Oregon, Washington, Idaho, and California. We have approximately 3,300 agents and brokers, and we have over 110 offices. Lennox Scott is a Power 200 recipient with Swanepoel, and a leader in the real estate industry. And we are a large independent brokerage in the 4 states, looking to expand rapidly into California. And so having Joel Singer with us really ties nicely into that. And Joel's the president of California Association of Realtors and has held a top position for over 30 years there in California. Started what's called the California Living Network in 1996, which was the first web-based listing and real estate information service. Also played an integral role in the positioning of ZipLogix, which is a transaction management and real estate forms company that many of you would know about already. And that's played a huge role in the development of our industry and just the ability to become more efficient as real estate practitioners. He's a leader on the political side. Rob Wolf, who Joel was just talking with, reminded me yesterday that Joel is so savvy when it comes to the politics and how to navigate those from a strategic standpoint, especially around all the issues that we deal with. And there's a few of those issues that Joel has played a huge role in, specifically around the interest rate, interest deduction. He's working right now on the property tax situation for 55 plus folks in California, and many other examples out there that we've talked about earlier this week. And I hope we have time for Joel to share today. So Lennox Scott described Joel, well, actually what Lennox said is what happens in California doesn't stay in California. With Joel's leadership and the new technologies that he's been behind, as well as one of the top leaders in the real estate industry, helping guide us through the issues and opportunities that come before us. So that's a direct quote from Lennox, and Lennox is actually on a Swanepoel call today, but wanted me to make sure to honor Joel with those words. So Joel, welcome to John L. Scott's Facebook Fridays, and appreciate you taking the time. I know you're a busy guy, but it looks like you're at home, sheltering in place. So welcome, thanks for joining us.
Thank you, James. It's a pleasure to be here. I've had the fortunate experience of knowing Lennox for 25 years. And we also visited your shop and been very impressed, obviously, with what you guys are doing.
Yeah, you brought in a team of 10 executives up to visit with us, and we were really honored by that because obviously had a lot of choices, and you chose to come and visit with Lennox and your 10 executives, and thank you for that. That means a lot to our entire organization, and I'm glad it was valuable. And certainly our time with you has been valuable. In fact, you came, it was very special for you to come and help us celebrate Chris Kutsky's grand opening at that time it was just the Wairika North office, and we had a nice dinner with Lennox and Leslie Appleton Young. For those of you on the call last week, we had mentioned the same dinner, which was an amazing dinner. We were absolutely stuffed by the time we were done, but you took that special opportunity to kind of be a part of that, and that meant a lot. I know that it meant a lot to Chris and obviously Lennox and the team.
Well, again, I remember it fondly. Obviously, you want to be there to support your friends. Chris has got a great operation. He was a tremendous leader. As the president of C.A.R, and I was glad to be part of that. And yeah. I look forward to having a discussion with you today.
Oh, well, thank you. You know, to start, Joel, you know, obviously there's a lot going on in the world, specifically, you know, most recently with all the riots and whatnot, and a lot of emotion around this. And when I was thinking about our meeting, I was thinking about how diverse your real estate roster is in California, and really wanted to ask you how you're proceeding for fair housing and the mission of equality in our industry and certainly in California.
Well, again, we certainly feel very strongly that there's a lot more work to be done in the area of fair housing, in the area of inclusion, in the area of tolerance. California is an incredibly diverse state, and that diversity is not equally accessible when it comes to those seeking first-time housing or housing generally. And so there's a lot of work to be done. We've got a lot of legislative initiatives going. We have a lot of education going. But the real estate industry does not have the best past in this area when we look at it historically. But I'd like to think that the events, the tragic events of the last few weeks and the pattern that we've seen is one that will rejuvenate and reinvigorate us to engage much more directly in these issues and try to create the environment we all want to see.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, you had mentioned that, actually a quote from you is that if you look at the entire problem of race, it's tied to wealth, schools, and access to affordable housing, which is a real estate thing.
Yeah, it's particularly a problem, of course, in California, given our lack of affordability. Race translates into financial and economic differentiation. We have a huge gap between homeowners and non-homeowners. Unfortunately, race also translates into lower homeownership rates. And all of that leads to educational difficulties. You know, neighborhoods that are less affluent, even to this day, have poor quality schools in most instances. And so this is a huge problem, and it's going to require concerted effort, but it's one where I think the real estate industry must engage. We must engage at the highest possible levels to influence change. And I guess the most important aspect from my standpoint is we confront in California especially a very difficult situation. California homeownership rates are dramatically below the national average. The national average is about 63%, 63.5%. In California, we're almost 10% below that. And the likelihood of past patterns of the last few years continue is that we'll be below 50% homeownership rate. That affects everyone, but it's particularly adverse in terms of lower income households and those of color. And so this is an issue of passion for our organization, and certainly for me personally. If we can increase the homeownership rate, we can start to address the financial differentials and start to provide a better opportunity for those households and hopefully for communities, because ultimately real estate is about selling community.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah, I was amazed when we talked earlier this week, and there's literally 53% tenants, right? And ownership is 53%, and then obviously you're imagining in the next few years, right down to 50-50 in the state. Obviously has a lot to do with this affordability. You know, Joel, on everyone's mind right now is the market recovery. And I know we've talked about V-shape and all sorts of different shapes, but could you share a little bit on your thoughts there and also some predictions for the future for our group?
Sure. Obviously, California, we locked down almost as early as Washington and some of the Northwest states, and certainly New York City. We've been locked down since the middle of March, and that did have a significant impact on closings in April and May. The good news is that most of the homes under contract were ultimately closed, but we saw a decline of into the 40% range when we look year to year on our May closings versus May 19 closings. So this was a very, very sharp downturn. The good news is that we've seen a substantial recovery in terms of pendings already. Pendings look at this point very close to the levels we experienced 12 months ago. And we're anticipating May closings, again, looking backwards, to have been the worst month of the year. And we expect June to be a significant recovery and July to look somewhat better. We are still, for the year as a whole, anticipating about a 10% downturn in the number of sides. And that presumes no huge, we're in the middle of a surge again here in California, no huge second wave. And that's a big presumption. That's going to require a certain discipline. But a 10% decline, what that really means is that by the fourth quarter, we will be operating fairly close to the levels we've seen over the last couple of years. But we will pay the price for what we've seen over those 2 or 3 months. And again, I just have to say, there's a lot of downside risk. Employment is not going to come back immediately. I guess what I'm saying, we do not believe there can possibly be a V-shaped recovery. Although we certainly believe, by the way, both intermediate and long-term, that housing is going to lead us out of this downturn. We think people learned incredible lessons over the last 3 months. And for those who are looking at residential housing, the place you live in particular, we're going to be one of the strongest and earliest recovering sectors. But we've got a lot of heavy lifting to do given the unemployment situation, the move around us. And you know, once I started looking out past that recovery towards 22, 23, I'm very optimistic about the prospects for residential real estate.
Mm-hmm. Any recommendations for agents or owners to be cautious around any specific recommendations there?
Well, you know, very clearly, and we have still restrictions in our state that prevent open houses. We have a whole series of guidelines. Obviously, you know, our first duty as realtors is to be extremely cognizant of our, you know, colleagues, our clients, and our communities. And for the most part, I think the realtors have done an excellent job of protecting their clients. We have rules in place, best practices that go beyond the rules that have been put out by local and state health authorities, and people have been adhering to them. We do not have a lot of incidents. There's you know, no proven incidents of COVID being you know, contracted through through a real estate transaction so far, and we'd like to see that continue. I think the pressure from our perspective is, you know, people do need to buy and sell real estate, and it is much more difficult to do it, even with the best virtual techniques. And that is forcing some, you know, families and clients to pay a high price for this, and we're concerned about it. But we've been, as always, we've been astonished and so impressed by the ability of individual realtors to creatively solve these issues and close housing. And this is a market to me. You know, you've got buyers markets, you've got sellers markets. This is a realtors market. Yeah. You know, the quality of your salesmanship, the quality of your agents make all the difference in this marketplace.
Nice. You know, for our group today, 15% of all realtors come out of California. So when we talk about it's like 212,000 real estate agents, literally, you know, under your care. So basically, Joel oversees a country, and in that country, they're doing about 3.5 sides per member, with an average of around 600,000, correct? And he compared that to Florida, is doing 1/3 less sales and 1/3 less the price, and we can analyze that all we want, but this is a big situation. Like, it's a major situation, right? And we can all learn from Joel and his experience with this this pretty amazing country that he oversees. And also within their membership, I think you mentioned 10% of your members are owners, correct? Or own a firm of some size or shape, right?
Yeah, and many of those are obviously people with broker's license operating individually. But we do have a huge number of individual offices, and actually 10% are 20,000 offices are single person offices or 2-people offices, which effectively are operating out of their homes in most instances, and doing reasonable business. You know, I would just put it this way: they tend to be successful brokers, but they're operating to a large degree as agents. And I think the question for the future is, you know, is that a structure that allows them to obtain the needed technology, the needed marketing, the branding? And so I think it's going to be a big time. You know, we've seen in the economy, this period we've been through is going to have profound changes in the economy. We're not sure what they are. And it's accelerated a lot of change, particularly around technology. My suspicion is, and this is a real opportunity, the industry is going to be profoundly impacted. I think there's going to be a lot of changes structurally, as well as what we've already seen in terms of the way people approach sales, where people are living, where people are moving, and what their expectations are, in particular, of their home.
You know, we talked about resuburbanization, which is a word that we're all going to have to be getting real comfortable using and saying, like me. So resuburbanization, could you touch on that and just kind of some of the accelerated trends? We talked a little bit with Leslie last week on accelerated trends, but you went even deeper into that, talking about the dramatic kind of reassessment of people's housing and their process, and how that impacts us. And obviously, this isn't just vacation homes or just moving a little ways out. It's a whole complete approach, including even you dropping 1/3 of your office space, as a part of that same idea, right?
Yeah, what we found, and I think many businesses are finding, and the real estate industry has seen this for a long time, that if you have the right technology, you can operate remotely, which we've done for a long time. But now we've had a period where we've been forced to operate 100% remotely, and we are metrics driven. You know, our biggest services include the number of legal opinions we give one-on-one, either through a Zoom or a telephone call to one of our members. Our productivity is higher for those. Our productivity is higher in terms of every measuring point. The number of people who come to our webinars, the number of people who come to our education courses, every indicator is that we're more productive out of the office than we were in the office. And I don't think we're all alone in that instance. Many service industries, many information-based companies, which is really what we are finding that they can operate extremely well with a dispersed staff. And again, my own personal experience, I now have 4 people working upstate, and they happen to be among my most productive people. We're starting to see a disconnection between the headquarters building and where you need to live and where you want to live. The implications of that are very broad from my perspective. One, just a general observation, although I'm very optimistic about residential real estate. I think people are going to really want to focus and concentrate on the quality of their housing. I'm almost equally pessimistic about commercial office space. We were already scaling down a 52,000 square foot office down to about 30,000 feet. When we do the final, we're in the approval process. We're converting our building site to mostly affordable residential housing. We'll probably scale it down further. The fact of the matter is, I do think this is a permanent change in terms of the number of people who will be typically working remotely versus the number of people working in a central location. So that has great implications for areas outside of the urban core, outside of Silicon Valley in California, for example, outside of the areas where you have huge congestion. The first bit of news is California and Los Angeles doesn't look like it used to. You can actually get somewhere. You can actually drive 50 or 60 miles an hour during rush hour. That's a big change. But that also means that you don't have to pay the prices that coastal California has always commanded. And one very graphic example, partly economic, but partly also driven by the desire and the ability to no longer be there. San Francisco has seen an extraordinary out-migration of renters. About 7% of the apartments, and again, very high-cost apartment market has vacated and has come vacant over the last 4 months. That's just an extraordinary number. The question is, where are those people going? And the opportunities are obviously to move to attractive places. Those attractive places are often within California. I'm sure Leslie talked a little bit about this, in terms of our inland valleys, in terms of the foothills of California, in terms of moving into your second home, be it in Lake Tahoe or somewhere else. But by and large, I think it's very good for the less dense areas in any state. And I think, again, the attractiveness of secondary markets is much larger. And in California, the threat to us, obviously, is that people move to far lower cost environments. We're seeing a lot of movement towards Texas. We're seeing a lot towards Nevada and Arizona, some obviously to the Pacific Northwest as well. But I think this is going to be a profound and sustainable change as we find we can disconnect more from what used to be a central office.
One quote you had said the other day to me was that you felt that we will never see a great supply again. And yet, with this kind of resuburbanization or moving out, obviously, you know, your Sacramento example, and even where you live for that matter, where affordable is greater, do you see affordability is greater? Do you see that the supply will increase as, you know, builders and such start looking out further to develop now with this new approach and obviously mobile workforce?
Yeah, I think the good news, at least, again, from a California standpoint, where we are, and I know the Pacific Northwest is not much better than this, we find it very difficult to meet our housing needs. We have constructed on an average of 70,000 units for the last 15 years. Our minimum needs are 160,000 units. There's a whole series of reasons that NIMBYism, the cost of fees, just general resistance to new housing development, and it's most prevalent in the cities. The ability to now offer attractive housing in areas that are more interested in growth, quite frankly, is something that I think is very positive. I think it will start to ameliorate the problem. But I think, again, there's got to be a commitment to creating these opportunities. Some states will do much better at it. And I think that's one of the risks for California, that if you don't start to address this, you know, there's incredible places in Washington. I had a chance to spend a few days traveling last summer in Washington. I went to a concert in the center of the state at the Gorge. And driving from there to Seattle is an incredible set of attractive locations. The same can be said for Wairika in Northern California. And I think those of us who live in coastal California, Sacramento, not Sacramento so much, but San Francisco, Los Angeles, Orange County, and San Diego have to recognize that this is a much stronger alternative. These secondary markets, as we used to think, could become primary markets.
Yeah. Yeah, secondary could become primary markets. Interesting, and a real opportunity, obviously, for contractors and really, especially with this resuburbanization, real estate agents, you know, and taking advantage of that opportunity and really marketing to that, because as you had mentioned, we simply want more house now.
Yeah, and there's a graphic example. The most graphic example, and Rob would visualize this. The developer friend of mine who's got 7 or 8 projects going was saying how difficult a project in the urban part of the Bay Area, which was a 4 or 5 story building with central elevators, how difficult of a time they're having selling that out. Yeah. On the other hand, in the East Bay Area, in Malaga of all places, they're able to sell expensive single family homes, some of which are single level homes, which is also relevant. And those projects are selling out faster than predicted, even in this marketplace. And so you're starting to see those movements, first within the urban agglomeration to the suburban areas, but I think it goes beyond that and goes to areas that are beyond the suburban fringes at this point.
Mm-hmm. Hey, James?
Yeah, I'm going to have Kellen ask a quick question around technology and the MLS, and I've asked him to unmute. So Kellen is our new, in the next few weeks, if the Department of Real Estate down there can get their act together post-COVID, or not post-COVID, in the middle of COVID, he will be coming on as our first Southern California office in Newport Beach or Costa Mesa, depending on how you look at the area. And Kellen has a quick question.
Sure.
Hey, Joel, thanks so much for joining us. Just in the vein of technology connecting us, and I'm sure you've heard these questions before, but what are the odds that we might see a more integrated multiple listing service for the entire state of California in the near future? Has there been any discussions because of COVID that have moved that along? And what are the challenges right now in achieving that from C.A.R's perspective?
Kellen, you know, I spent the most miserable 5 years of my life trying to create a statewide MLS. And I failed. although we did create C.A.R. MLS, which now
Yeah.
covers about 125,000 of our 210,000 realtors, and covers, you know, a large market area, basically all of Southern California with one exception. I think there should be movements in that direction, but I'd be less than candid with you if I thought it would happen quickly. There's resistance to that for all the wrong reasons. But I'm hopeful, again, that the change we're seeing that's accelerating, the reality is that markets now that didn't seem connected are now connected.
Sure.
Will give more, you know, bigger push towards that occurring. Certainly there will be continued growth of the single MLS, but it's going to be still resistant, I'm afraid.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. I was just curious on your perspective, but I agree with you. I think that we are becoming more interconnected, and I have clients who are in, you know, Orange County who want to move to the Central Coast, and luckily C.A.R. MLS offers that, but Santa Barbara decides to exclude itself, and there are just these funny pockets that are just difficult for realtors to navigate.
Yeah, and Kellen, you raised the most important point of all. I think the question we have to ask ourselves, and this goes to almost everything we do, is this in the best interest of customers? You know, because from my perspective, and realtors, you know, if you had more scale, you could have more investment in the MLS. You would have more exposure, the ability to build software for one standard that was statewide or national for that matter. And there's been movements towards that, would create better product for customers and better product for realtor and would lower costs. And most importantly, give your customers ultimately a much better experience in terms of their ability to select the house that best meets their needs. And so it's been an area of frustration, but we started out when the largest MLS in California was about 22,000. So we did make progress, but we've got a lot more to do. And it's unacceptable that we don't have a national MLS, quite frankly.
Well, I'm an advocate if you need any help, but thanks.
I'm going to call you.
All right. That sounds good.
Oh, thanks, Colin. Hey, so Joel, we're talking about some of your predictions around interest rate, which will affect us all in a positive way, as well as some just areas, problem areas in the mortgage industry, and obviously around super jumbo and whatnot. Could you share on that?
Yeah, and the news today was a little unfortunate because the forbearance rate went back up, and forbearances are what part of the uncertainty in the marketplace. If you look at interest rates, and you look at what the Fed has said, you've got a 10-year bond that's been floating around 70 basis points. At this point in the normal market cycle, 130 to 150 basis points would be the price of the 30-year. So it's not unrealistic if the market completely normalizes to see interest rates in the very low twos for the 30-year mortgage. They're obviously considerably above that, and part of that is that dislocation in the mortgage-backed security markets. And forbearance is the biggest problem there. Forbearance is probably a good idea in terms of eliminating, or I should say eliminating, reducing and flattening the curve on foreclosures. There will be some. We don't anticipate very many, but there will be some. But the impact it's had in the interest rate market has been everybody else has been subsidizing and will be subsidizing those types of behaviors for the foreseeable future. So. But even with that, our assumption is that interest rates stay very, very low for the next 3 years. And we expect there to be some normalization. So the interest rates you're seeing today, which are already incredibly attractive, are likely to become more attractive. And from our perspective, the difficulties that we're seeing, you know, on the credit side, on the availability of low down payment loans, those also tend to get better over the next year or two. Again, we're going to be facing economic difficulties, a lot of people unemployed and income losses. But we think the shock impact of that will wear down over time, and you'll see normalization. So the interest rate market is, for the next 3 years, one of the other reasons I think we should be optimistic once we get through this crisis and the immediate economic impacts, is that it's going to be the best interest rate market of the last 2 generations. And
you're talking 50 basis points, correct? Likely reduction.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah. It should be. You know, by most measures, I would have anticipated a 2.25 rate at this point. given where we are with the 10-year.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, for conforming. Obviously, it would be different for non-conforming.
And then how about the super jumbo situation that you were talking about?
Yeah, the super jumbo situation is even more complicated. Right now, super jumbos are priced very close to the conforming loan price, but it really depends on your lender. All of that has been shaken up a little bit by the actions of the last couple of days. By the way, the review of banks and some of the restrictions placed on them, the fact that they're going to go for a second review this year. Most of those have been portfolio loans. Some of them have been private MBS. But I would expect the super jumbo market, which has been surprisingly strong, to also start trending downward as we get later into this year and certainly into next year. But again, a lot of it will depend on the forbearance issues and how those are treated, the ability of the Fed and FHFA in particular to be more reasonable to the servicers. The servicers are bearing much of the cost of the forbearance. There are ways to get around there. We need to create new instruments. We need to have learned the lessons of what happened in 2006 through 2010. And although some of them have been learned, it's going to still be a little bit of a learning curve before we get full normalization. But attractive interest rates will be there for your well-qualified buyers already, and increasingly go back to what we've experienced over the last couple of years, where even low down payment borrowers will be able to access those marketplaces at affordable rates.
Thank you. I have 23 years of California residency under my belt, and hopefully at some point more of that, as I'd love to see the sun again. Although I will be down there in a week and visit with Kellen and a couple other folks. So, and always love doing that. I already understand kind of the tax situation, the property tax situation down there, and how that has slowed down or even restricted movement, people moving around, right? I'd like you to first just describe the situation in California for those of us that don't know about it on the call and on Facebook Live. And then if you could just share with the group what you're working on right now to maybe loosen those things. So.
Sure. So California is an extremely high tax state. If you look at it from an income tax standpoint, we go up to 13% on the income tax. There are communities in California where the sales tax is 10%, but there is one on a rate basis, low tax. That's property taxes. Property taxes are capped at effectively 1.25%, a little higher now because of special taxes. But property taxes in California are determined at the time of sale. The maximum under what we call Prop 13, going back to 1978, is effectively 1.3% or so. The problem is that if you're sitting on a home at a 1.3% rate, given our appreciation, and you've been in that home for many years, you run up against two problems when you want to transfer. One is the capital gains tax. That's only capped at $500,000. Again, in a state where you've got communities with median prices well over $1 million, and these were homes that were working class homes 30 years ago.
80 grand.
Yeah, and a lot of communities in all of coastal California, that's already a barrier. But the worst barrier in some way is you may have a very low income tax. If you've been in the home since 1978, I'm sorry, very low property tax. If you've been in the home in 1978, it's not atypical for you to have a home that is now worth $2 million, but your income tax is $1,200 a year. If you were to move into the same home, your income on an annual basis, your property tax would go from $1,200 to $2,400 or $25,000. So you're talking about a 20 times increase. As a result, a lot of people
don't move.
They don't move. They stay in their house.
Or there's some fancy footwork though, right? Can they kind of transfer it among family or whatever? I'm sure you see some of that.
Yeah, and we want to make sure that, in case of divorce, the death of a spouse, things like that, there's no penalty at all. You keep that low.
Right.
And you've also had some an aberrational situation that will get changed no matter what we do, and when we're engaged in this, where you've been able to allow intergenerational transfers of property. So there's no increase. So you can give it to a grandson or even a son. or daughter or granddaughter and keep the same property tax base. But that's under attack as we now are in the deficit situation. Our concern is to try to make it easier for at least those people over 55 or over consuming housing, because there's no incentive. If you want to trade down from a 3,500, square foot, $2 million house to a $1 million house,
The tax goes up.
yeah, there's no incentive to do it on the property tax side. So we've created a legislation and actually qualified it at the ballot box that will allow you to do so. It'll allow you to trade up or down and keep the portion of, if you have a $2 million house assessed at this value, that portion you can keep as you go up and as you go down. Because we anticipate in the powers that be at the administrative offices in California anticipate tens of thousands of more sales. This will work for local counties to raise their revenues, but it'll also make it much easier for people to, seniors in particular, also victims of fires and a couple of other groups to trade down or trade sideways or get out of those homes that no longer make sense for them many years later. And so we're very excited about it. It qualified for the ballot. We're actually trying to improve the legislation a little bit and have done so in a very tough legislative fight. But come November, we think that'll be in front of the voters. And I'm given the support we're getting from firefighters, local government, I'm very confident it'll pass.
So is there another state in the union that has the same kind of Prop 13 deal?
There are some states that do. Most of them do have, though, reassessments at different periods. Arizona's got a cap like that, but it reassesses annually. Many states have a cap that looks like Prop 13, but generally they reassess. And there's other elements of California property law that will come under attack. Corporations, if they transfer ownership through a share structure, they don't get reassessed. So over the course of Prop 13, we've seen the property tax rolls go from 60% or so commercial in terms of the revenues collected to now about 35% commercial. That's under attack this year, and that will be another initiative. We have historically not supported it, but there's a lot going on there. Our concern is with that falling home ownership rate to try to create more supply where it's needed, to try to give people more flexibility and try to create more affordability by so doing.
Yeah. I just find it so interesting because what you're proposing really, I guess it could lengthen, if you will, I guess the life of the California residents' ability to keep that tax rate and be able to kind of, if you will, grandfather in, but still move. But the opportunity in other areas of even state revenue, obviously, is so great that, gosh, I mean, do you see, are you experiencing massive resistance around this, or do you feel like this might just go?
I think it's going to go at this point. For years, we had a hard time convincing the assessors in particular that, hey, this would work to your advantage. And we do have laws that allow you to, if you're trading down or to an equivalent property, you can take your base with us. But those are only in 8 counties out of our 58 counties. But in almost every case, those are revenue generators as opposed to the alternative. And I think people are finally starting to see that. We do have the support, at least through the legislative process, and I assume we'll get it in November from the local governments association in California, and that's gonna help. So we do think this will pass. We do think this is something that makes sense at all levels, and California, like all states, is going to need revenue. This does generate revenue by the legislative office's analysis, and that's going to be helpful.
All of us real estate agents out there that work with buyers and sellers, especially buyers, obviously talking about the mortgage interest deduction. For those people, I think it would be really, really cool for us to hear a little bit of your political work around defeating and eliminating, defeating the bill that would eliminate the interest deduction. Could you share just a little backstory there and how that went?
Well, we've always opposed and restrictions on mortgage interest deductibility. We think the mortgage interest deduction, first and foremost, is one of the reasons in California, not so much, but the nation as a whole has had a historically high homeownership rate compared to the rest of the world, the developed countries in particular. That was already hammered by the Tax Act that passed in the early stages of the Trump administration, by the restriction to 750,000, but even more so by the limit on your deductions for SALT and state and local taxes, particularly the property tax. We thought that the limit, which was at $1 million, should not have been reduced, and we obviously felt that there should be 100% deductibility of property taxes. We lost that. At the state level, there was an attempt to completely remove the mortgage interest deduction from second homes. There was an attempt to conform. California has not conformed to the federal law. We still, on your state taxes, and remember I said they could be up to 13%, you can deduct the $1 million and you could still deduct your property tax. There was an attempt to conform on owner occupancy to conform to the federal law, and on second homes to eliminate it entirely, as it would on, commercial is a different story, but it would have eliminated it. We were able to beat that bill. And we will continue to do that. And obviously in California, we have a gun to our head. We're already losing home ownership. And realtors understand this better than anyone else. If you just look at the statistics, the average homeowner versus the average renter is much better positioned financially. We know that. It's on the order. Some of the studies show as much as 175 times more personal wealth for owners versus renters. But it's more than that. It's better education levels, the ability to live in safer communities, higher health outcomes. Every statistic you look at from a social standpoint, homeownership really matters. It matters in such a positive way. And as you can tell, I'm passionate about homeownership. But this is really what we're focused on. And the mortgage interest deduction is one of the key ways of doing it, but there's lots of other things that we have to do. We really believe that what realtors do in putting people into homes really, really matters. And I've got a personal experience that has impregnated that into my mind since I've been 5 years old. And we will do everything we can to make sure that home ownership access continues.
That reminds me, Joel, you told me a little bit of that story when we were at dinner in Ashland. Could you share a little bit of that with the group here?
Well, I'll do it quickly. My parents were immigrants. They came to the country with nothing. They were brought over by the United Nations Relief Agency 3 years before I was born. We lived in an apartment. And when I was 5, my parents bought their first home. And they bought that home on an FHA program. They bought it actually with the reparations dollars that they received from the German government for the time they had been imprisoned. I get emotional about it because I remember the day so vividly. We moved into a house I thought was a palace. First of all, I didn't have to share a room with my 2-year-old sister. That was a big deal. And
you can get emotional.
Not only did I have, I got my own room, but my parents said, you can paint it any color you wanted. And I had them painted this nice blue, and my sister picked up pink, of course. It's a long time ago. And I thought it was a palace. We had a backyard. That palace was an 890 square foot home. It was a Kaiser-built home built for the Douglas airplane manufacturers in Santa Monica's workplace. But I thought it was a palace. But even more than I remember my personal feeling, I remember my dad, who had never owned anything in his life, had always been a renter in a foreign country and had everything taken away from him. Everything, literally. And my mom, the difference that made to them. And then beyond that, I have to say, I'm truly passionate. They had friends who were realtors, and I remember those realtors telling them, sitting at the table, telling them, you must do this. You must buy a couple more houses on the west side whenever you can. And they bought a couple of other houses in West LA. They bought 3 of them. One of them they rented to a cousin, who was down on his luck. The other 2 they treated as, single family rentals. And if it wasn't for those houses, which did incredibly well, my parents wouldn't have had a great second half of their life, and they did. After all the troubles and travails of the first, 50 years for my dad, they were able to live a nice life afterwards. And my mother was a cafeteria worker. My dad was a warehouseman, and they had a great, because of real estate, and only because of real estate. They were able to live the life and provide for their kids in an amazing way. And obviously, I'll never forget that story. And, you know, the son of the realtor who was most influenced is a big producer in LA. He sold those houses when my parents passed about 10 or 12 years ago. That was my tribute to him and his family. Because what realtors do really matters. And, you know, and I'll just say this in another way, in this marketplace, I know it's difficult. It's very difficult in a certain marketplace, but realtors, you know, play this important role. When you sit down with your friends, your colleagues, your clients, and you explain to them and you give them the benefit of your expertise, and you make them sometimes do things they're not instinctively going to do. In my personal experience, that works out well almost in every case. So this is a market where you can make it as a realtor. And I know many of you are doing so, and I urge you to be, I urge you to engage as much as you can, particularly, you know, when it's slow this next couple of years, when it's slower than it otherwise will be. You look out a year or two, people will really benefit and take advantage of the opportunity, much the same as they did 2010, 11, and 12. I remember, you know, everywhere I went, I said it was a once in a generational opportunity to buy a home. We could find this being a very attractive, I think it will be a very attractive opportunity as we look towards the rest of this year and next year.
Joel, thank you for sharing that. I kind of hear the emotion behind your voice, and it's amazing, you know, how that experience, you know, obviously you play a major role in real estate. And so, you know, it's kind of the finding your why, Simon Sinek concept a little bit. And it touched you in such a deep way. And you remind us all of the responsibility we have beyond the transaction, right? Like you talked about the pride that you felt your dad had by having that kind of little 800 square footer, right? And then being able to go and buy three more, right? Like, wow, right? So obviously, this explains a lot, right, about what you've been involved in for the last several decades. So thank you for that. You know, you had a marketplace discussion with 5 top producers recently. Could you share a little bit of what came from that?
And I had some amazing producers. I had producers who are, you know, in the top 25 of, you know, the realty lists of everybody's realty list. So I get to do a lot of things with realtors, but the one thing I always do myself, I will never delegate, is the chance to sit down at our convention or with a Zoom with our top producers because they're so energizing. You know, I got exactly what I expected from the top producers, which, and we had almost 2,000 people on the call with us, so you can imagine. And that is how to navigate this marketplace. And a lot of it was predicated on not what happens now and not what happened in the last 60 days. It was predicated on the relationships you built over time, your ability to listen, and your ability to identify, and your ability to advise in a you know, in a very personal way. And obviously, all the, you know, top producers are extremely hardworking. They're extremely well organized. All the traits we're all aware of it. But when it was all said and done, it was real clear that what top producers were best able to do is identify with the real needs of their clients and make it happen. And you know, that's really going to be the story over there. There's no secret sauce here. There's no 1 or 2 things you can do. People would, you know, obviously we let them engage and ask questions. It really was about the relationship. It was about your ability to be the trusted advisor, your ability to be clinical and understand your local marketplace, and was your ability to engage without fear in the current marketplace.
You know, you also had suggested, you know, when we talked, that you felt that property management would be hit pretty hard in the next little while here. And yet, you know, with, you know, 47% renter base. Could you touch a little bit on that?
Yeah, well, first of all, I feel strongly that property management is one of the best counter-cyclical things a broker can do.
Yeah.
So having a counter-cyclical like property management has historically been an outstanding way to get through downturns, even small downturns or downturns that were completely unexpected for non-economic reasons, as this one occurs. The problem that I think we're seeing in California and other states is that the draconian regulations that are being put on property managers, the inability to access the courts, the forgiveness that is being required. And we've had to beat some bills in the legislature that are just unbelievable because they completely walk over the property rights of property owners. And again, I'm very sympathetic to tenants. This is an extremely difficult situation for tenants. But some of the bills have suggested that there's a 15-month period before you have to do a payback. During that 15-month period, you can't, we beat this bill, you can't do an eviction, even if there was arrears prior to the pandemic. I mean, at least in California, there is, for whatever reason, no perception of how important small landlords in particular, but landlords generally are to providing these housing opportunities for people who need them. So the roughness I'm worried about is the ability to operate in an irrational environment.
Yeah.
Things that you have to do to take care of your good tenants, while at the same time getting enough of an economic return to stay in business I can't guarantee those to my members in California. But by and large, if you're in a state where people understand we have to do something for tenants, we also have to protect property rights, in particular, make sure that our rental market stays vibrant. I think property management is going to be a good business, as it always is, and I think it's important as a counter-cyclical tool for brokers. So the difficulty is, how do you navigate through these difficult, and sometimes far-fetched approaches that local governments are putting in place, or even at the state level, the attempts to put them in place at the state level. How do you represent the best interests of your property-owning clients, particularly the small ones, who are really, it's a transfer of wealth from them to clients in many interests, to renters in many interests. In many instances, it's not clear who's in worse financial position. So one of the things, again, in California that we don't have, that, we have a very aggressive rent control, but one of the things that we have to think differently about is if we're going to have rent control, maybe one of the things we ought to talk about, which we never talk about because we think rent control is so counterproductive. Maybe we need to talk about, if you have to have rent control, let's have a means test. Mm-hmm. Let's not have rent control for people who are taking advantage of their wealth to have a government subsidy when they don't need one. Let's make sure subsidy goes where it needs to go, which is to those people who really need help.
Rob, you had a question that we were talking about yesterday. Do you want to unmute and ask your question, or did you get it resolved before our show started?
Question resolved.
Oh, okay. Well, just wanted to make sure. And Nick or Aaron, any questions out there that we haven't been able to ask yet?
Yeah, James, I have one from Facebook and one from Zoom. So the one from Facebook, Joel, is, you said that it's a realtor's market right now. What do you think is a top thing realtors should be doing right now?
I think the most important thing is to engage with your clients and engage with people who were your clients. Realtors are excellent at keeping contact up when they're looking at prospects. And I think the good realtors do well after close. But I think this is a time where many, many people will be assessing their housing needs. And the only way you'll know that is if you really aggressively reach out to your circle. I think people don't know their options. Again, we're aware that interest rates are attractive. We're aware that sales can in fact occur and do so safely. My suspicion is that there's a lot of clients who are not nearly aware of that. And the only way they become aware is if you can talk to them, understand their housing needs, and provide them with some incredible options. I think every one of us, is looking at this situation. We have months to go with it before there's at least a complete resolution. We're looking, and one of the big questions we're asking is this the right environment for me? Particularly if in the future I'm going to work more at home. Do I have the right office space? Do I have the right size of space? Do I have the yard my kids need if my kids are going to do more of their education online? Do I have the right community? Can I take advantage of policies that my high-tech company is putting in place that allow me to work remotely? I think it's just an incredible time to talk to clients, and I suspect that there's a lot of opportunity, and it might not be immediate, but over the next 18 to 24 months, we're going to see lots of positive opportunities, and the engaged realtor is the one who's going to obviously benefit the quickest. It's going to be a very, very good time to buy as the COVID pandemic wanes.
Mm-hmm. Second question, Nick.
Yeah. So this one is from Zoom. So Joel, if we see more and more companies eliminate the amount of office space they're using, what do you see happening with the repurposing of the commercial real estate that isn't being used down the road?
Well, it's going to be a little bit of a transition, but I'm actually excited about it from a California perspective. From a California perspective, much of this, I think, can be repurposed very effectively as housing. As I said, we've created a 1,500,000 units shortage over the last 12 years. I mean, that's just a physical shortage of housing between some retail conversion and some commercial office space conversion. I think that's an opportunity to convert a lot of it to housing, and that's what you're going to see. I mentioned our example. We're in a 55,000 square foot building with a parking lot around it. We will get approval. We're pre-approved with the city of Los Angeles to put 130,000 units on that space, and at the same time cut the office space down to 30,000 square feet. We may actually increase the number of units and further cut down, as I said, the office space. And the demand, we're in the Koreatown section of Los Angeles, right west of downtown, which was an incredibly hot marketplace, although I think some of the trends we're seeing here may have some impact on it. Conversion opportunities are enormous. I also think there's other opportunities that this creates in terms of, we know that retail is going to be radically altered. You're going to need a lot more warehouse space. People are going to make the transition to delivery and virtual purchasing to a much larger, this accelerated trends that we've already seen, and there's a long way to go. Prior to COVID, about 14 to 18%, depending on how you measure it, of retail sales were online. That number is going to go up dramatically, and it can go up a long way. But as that number goes up, your needs change. You do need spaces to operate in a wholesale business, to operate on a warehouse business. So we'll see some of that. But to me, the most exciting aspect is, conversion to residential real estate. And in those marketplaces, and obviously the Northwest is one of those growth marketplaces also, where more supply is a positive. This is an opportunity.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Nick. Thanks for that question. So last question of the day, Joel, who's your hero?
Well, all my life, since I was a kid, I've looked to Winston Churchill for inspiration. I don't know why that is. I read history when I was a 6 or 7, 8, 9-year-old, I guess. And I still find Winston Churchill's quotes to be very, very inspiring. I'm also very moved, and I've spent a lot of time, and I do think the most recent leader that has impressed me the most has been Nelson Mandela. And what Nelson Mandela was able to achieve without bitterness, and really create a constitution and an equity system in South Africa that hasn't lived up to the theory, but what Nelson Mandela achieved is also inspirational to me.
Yeah. Well, any parting thoughts for the group here? We're going to wrap up our show, just to be mindful of everyone's time. Any other thoughts or advice or anything like that?
Well, I appreciate seeing all of you and being given this opportunity. Again, from my perspective, I think there's many reasons to be optimistic. We just need to get through this pandemic. Unfortunately, we don't control the pandemic, but I do think that the residential real estate market is going to do well. I think engaging at the highest levels you've ever engaged in makes a difference. And I would encourage you also to engage in other processes. Let's deal with these issues of equity and fairness in the housing market. Let's deal with political engagement just generally. And again, for those of you who are in California or anywhere, to the extent that you can engage with your realtor organization to make sure that you're getting, the environment you're looking for. We welcome any input and welcome certainly any direct engagement. So thanks again. I wish everyone best of luck, and I appreciate being given the opportunity.
Well, thank you, Joel. On behalf of Lennox Scott, John L. Scott, and our entire Facebook Fridays team, it's just been an absolute pleasure to have you on the show, and you bring a wealth of information leading in our industry, and obviously have done a lot of work over a lot of years. Loved your story about five-year-old little boy, and how that was obviously the catalyst in so many areas for you to fight for affordability and homeownership and the value of all that and obviously and how that impacts each of us even today. So I appreciate your time today. I know that you are a busy guy. So again, thank you for that. And I wish everyone a wonderful weekend. And let's see, I mean, basically same place, same time, except for next week. We will be taking the Friday off because it's July 3rd. And I'm thinking not a lot of you would join us on July 3rd. So we're going to give everyone a break and we'll catch up the week after that. So on behalf of John L. Scott, thank you, Joel, for joining us, and have a wonderful weekend.
Bye-bye. Thank you.